Page 55, 3. Arguments. How do we motivate for change? It's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than think your way into a new way of acting. Jerry Sterling. The power of positive deviance. Our goal in the vegan movement is to get as many possible as possible to live with us in Veganville. Presently, they are living comfortably somewhere else. Veganville, as we know, is up a mountain, and people won't get there accidentally. Something needs to happen for them to start the trek. Even if we tell them it's acceptable only to travel part of the journey, they'll still need to have some kind of motivation. When I wrote about goals earlier, I mentioned vegans' double demand. We want people to demonstrate a certain behavior, not consuming animal products, because of certain beliefs that animals matter morally, just as we can be pragmatic in what we ask people to do, what they eat. So we can be pragmatic about which arguments we use to motivate them. Our commitment to ethical awareness doesn't mean we should insist that people change for the same reasons, or advocating on the basis of ethical consistency or rigor is the best and fastest avenue to our goal. Moral versus non-moral factors. When we examine the different factors that drive change for animals, we can distinguish between the moral and non-moral. Most people who consider themselves part of the vegan movement have ethical reasons for not consuming animal products, usually based on a belief that it's unjust to curse a non-human animal to suffer or be killed for food. They may further believe that it's wrong to use animals for entertainment or experimentation based on similar criteria. In addition to these ethical concerns, vegans may be worried about environmental pollution and animal agriculture's contribution to climate change, as well as how raising animals or crops for feed screws a food system that leaves millions of people hungry. That said, these last two worries may be thought of as indirect reasons in the light of many vegans' fundamental belief that animals should not be used instrumentally. Given these philosophical groundings, it's not surprising that the vegan movement focuses a great deal on using moral arguments to influence attitudes and behaviors. The message that is unethical, or at least morally problematic, to eat or wear animal products takes up considerable space in our pamphlets, newsletters, and magazines, as well as on our websites and social media feeds. Advocates post memes to help people understand the ethical dilemmas posed by their consumption habits, diet, and otherwise. We publish books about animal rights theory and discuss morality at our conferences. The words on our signs, slogans, and even from our mouth at the demonstrations and protests are crushed in the language of an ethical awakening. Day in, day out, we communicate moral messages through buttons, bumper, stickers, and t-shirts, all of them asking or telling people to stop eating animals. At the same time, it's an inconvenient truth for many of us in the vegan movement that a significant number of vegetarians and vegans avoid animal products because they believe it's healthy to do so. Some eat vegan food because a partner or other household membranous or animal products are too expensive. Others may even simply not like the taste, texture, look or smell of animal products. Deaf. Some of you might be turning up your noses at or feeling uncomfortable with these motivations, which are devoid of concerns about animals per se. Indeed, you may think these examples aren't about veganism at all, since without the ethical aspect we can call it vegan, plant-based eating would be more accurate. You may feel that in order to create permanent change, an ethical motivation or general behavioral alternation must be present. You may deplore how those who avoid animal food products for non-moral reasons may not avoid other aspects of animal use, such as entertainment, clothing, or using other consumer products that involve animals. In a sense, many vegans place little faith in non-moral arguments and consider them problematic. Conversely, they believe that moral arguments will lead to lasting change. In this chapter, I argue that neither view is correct. Our movements focus on moral messages. Sometimes vegans take the premium we put on moral messages quite far. Here are two representative illustrations from social media. The only way we will ever achieve what we want to achieve is by promulgating a sound and clear moral argument that animals are not ours to use. That is the only solid foundation on which our hope for a vegan world can lie. This is the only thing that is strategic or pragmatic, and certainly the only thing that's just. Show the documentary film Earthlings to everyone, terrien en français, show it in schools, and then we will all turn vegan overnight. Many of us hold an uninvestigated belief that moral arguments cause the great revolutions in the world. We tend to believe that when humanity made moral progress, change happened first and foremost because a group of people put forth an ethical case for change and others agreed with it. By way of illustration, we like to believe that slavery in the US and UK ended because people no longer accepted that their fellow human beings should be held in bondage, and that abolition occurred mainly because the righteous stood against injustice and converted everyone else. Here's another example from an online discussion. In the past, the majority of the population of the United States, particularly in the southern states, was in favor of slavery, and many plantations in the South even depending on it financially. Just because 90% of the population is in favor of eating animal products and celebrates it does not make it any less morally wrong. Therefore, focus on all energies on creating a paradigm shift in the culture, help people to realize that animal exploitation is morally wrong. Whereas no one could claim that moral outrage was unimportant in the ending of slavery, it was never the only norm nor the main factor in abolition. For one thing, the Industrial Revolution helped ensure that human labor became more expensive and less convenient relative to automation. Even slaves have to be housed and fed, so slavery was never entirely cost-free. For another, the South didn't simply accede to the argument. It seceded, a bloody civil war ensued, and the South was defeated by the North, where slavery was much less important economically. Norm Phelps writes about this. African slavery in America was ended by a war conducted by the United States government and supported by both the general public and the corporate capitalist establishment in the North. This fact is universally known. Every high school student is taught it. But it is universally ignored by animal activists committed to agitation as the only valid strategy for animal liberation. Page 171. Phelps' comment is intriguing. If he is right, and I think he is, why would so many people ignore the fact that slavery didn't end how they think it did? Apparently, we somehow want or need to believe that revolutions like the abolition of slavery occur because of moral awakening exclusively or primarily. This thinking exemplifies a tendency among vegan animal advocates to want people to stop exploiting animals because they care about them. Remember the double demand? Slavery is not the only example of the wrong being ended by a non-moral driver. In 1986, the International Whaling Commission, IWC, declared a moratorium on commercial whaling. The IWC might never have reached its decision if the commercial importance of whaling hadn't diminished significantly since the late 19th century. Whales, and sperm whales especially, used to be an important source of energy. Whale oil was extracted and used primarily as fuel for lamps, but also in heating, soap, paint, and other products. Countless numbers of whales were killed for this reason. In 1849, Abraham Gesner, a Canadian physician and geologist, developed kerosene, a liquid made from coal, bitumen, a form of petrol, and oil shale. Unlike whale oil, kerosene was neither smelly or dirty. It didn't spoil and, most importantly, was cheaper to produce than whale oil. As kerosene distilleries popped up everywhere and kerosene was commercialized, demand for whale oil collapsed. Ironically, kerosene sales themselves collapsed when Thomas Edison commercialized his light bulb technology. The whaling industry lasted for a while on sales of whalebone, which was used for corsets and other garments. However, that was soon replaced by other materials, and in the end, the industry declined. Abraham Gesner obviously hadn't been trying to ban whaling, either for moral or non-moral reasons, yet the result was the same. The last American whaler left port in 1924 and was brought back the next day Robbins. How much easier it was still more than 50 years later to ban commercial whaling in most countries. Here's another example of social change, one that didn't rely on technological advances. In 2010, Catalonia, a so-called autonomous region in Spain, banned bullfighting. Animal rights organizations had been using the slogan "torture isn't culture" for years. But moral outrage alone didn't kill off this particular form of animal abuse. The motivation was in part political. Many Catalonian nationalists were happy for a practice they considered traditionally Spanish to disappear. Banning bullfighting was a statement of independence, a symbol of a breach with Spanish culture and customs. These sentiments helped many Catalonians to vote in favor of the ban. Attendance at bullfights in Catalonia was already low by the time of the vote, and it was mainly an older population that still seemed to enjoy them. People might have stayed away because they were morally crazy about bullfighting, but we shouldn't assume this was the only reason. Other forms of entertainment may have been easier to access or more attractive. In any case, when something is neither lucrative or nor a significant part of the economy, there will obviously be much less resistance to its abolition. Awareness is overrated. Clearly, factors other than ethical awakening can play a significant role in ending customs or rejecting ideas that people find reprehensible. Conversely, raising awareness with moral arguments is not sufficient in itself and may work less well than advocates hope and expect. Usually, most activists and changemakers, even when they know better, operate according to the basic idea that when we give people the correct information, they will alter their behavior. In the case of vegans, we believe that if, thanks to our outreach, people realize that the suffering and killing of animals for the meat, death, is wrong, they will draw the obvious conclusion and stop eating animal products. It's not only activists who think like this. Psychologists have long thought it obvious that attitude influences behavior. However, in their studies, they found out that the link was much weaker than they would suppose, and was dependent upon many factors. Houston et al., Holland et al., Krauss recur. There is now a consensus among social scientists and psychologists that providing information alone doesn't change people's behavior. This is the attitude-behavior gap. If we can get beyond the barrier of people not listening to or hearing us, if we can reach them amid all the hundreds of the other messages that are fired and then at them daily, they may, in a best-case scenario, get our message and believe it is true and right. But that won't necessarily incite them to real action, which in the end is necessary for there to be an actual impact. One example of this attitude behavior gap is offered by philosophy professor Eric Schwitzgebel, who has conducted research into the behavior for ethics professors Schwitzgebel and Wust. Schwitzgebel found that these individuals, who might be thought to be highly motivated to be ethically consistent or knowledgeable about moral codes and consequences, didn't behave any differently from other professions, nor did they live more in accordance with their beliefs than others. Schwitzgebel even examined the topics that interest us, eating meat, death, whereas ethics professors were much more likely to agree that it was wrong to eat the meat or mammals regularly, 60% compared to 45% of non-ethicist professors and 19% of professors outside moral philosophy. There were not any more vegetarians among the ethics professors. Schwitzgebel puts it thus. An ethicist philosopher considers whether it's morally permissible to eat the meat of factory-farmed mammals. She reads Peter Singer, moral philosopher and author of Animal Liberation. She reads in objections and replies to Singer. She concludes that it is in fact morally bad to eat meat. Death. She presents the material in her applied ethics class. Maybe she even writes on this issue. However, instead of changing her behavior to match her new moral opinions, she retains her old behavior. She teaches Singer's defense of vegetarianism, both outwardly and inwardly, endorsing it, and then proceeds to the university cafeteria for a cheeseburger, perhaps feeling somewhat bad about doing so. Schwitzgebel. These professors were morally opposed but not behaviorally opposed to eating meat. Herzog, page 201. For vegetarians and vegans, it's easy and tempting to judge these people as hypocritical, weak-willed, or mendicious. However, rather than seeing them as uncaring or selfish, it might be more helpful to examine what trouble or inconvenience they go through or fear they may have to overcome to maintain ethical consistency. At this point, people such as our meat-eating ethics professors may experience what is called cognitive dissonance. Festinger, when a value or belief I care about animals and behavior I'm eating animals, contracted one another. The conflict can also be between different values, beliefs, or ideas. The dissonance is by definition unpleasant, and we want to avoid it. We have several options. These are so-called dissonance reduction strategies. Gerber. A few people will resolve the feeling of discomfort by aligning their behavior with their values or beliefs. They become vegetarian or vegan. Most people, however, are wary of changing their behavior, at least when it causes significant inconvenience, and solve the dissonance by doing the opposite. They try to change their beliefs so they are in line with their behavior, eating meat. Death. People attempt sometimes successfully to believe in lies and half-truths as rationalizations. The animals die a quick death. They are raised for meat. They don't feel as much as we do. We need to eat meat, and on through the various ends of justifications. A third method by which we deal with the discomfort is by doing what we can to avoid the confrontation with the most uncomfortable parts or implications of our behavior. James Serpell talks about the so-called distinguishing devices. We detach ourselves from the animals we eat and avoid emotional intimacy with them. We conceal factory farms and slaughterhouses. We misrepresent animals in order to make exploiting them easier. Serpell. Or we may simply try to ignore the problem and pretend that we are not aware of it, something the literature calls affected ignorance. Williams, 2008. Attitude change can follow behavioral change. Changing our beliefs obviously can lead to an alteration in behavior. The link is simply weaker than one would expect. However, vegans tend to overlook the obvious reality that change can work the other way around. Altering behaviors can lead to a change in attitude, as figure 9 on the opposite page illustrates. The late Yale University psychologist Robert Abelson notes, "We are very well trained and very good at finding reasons for what we do, but not very good at doing what we find reasons for." Page 25. Let's look at a couple of examples to see more clearly how someone's behavior can influence their attitudes and beliefs about it. Figure 9, two starting points for changing attitude behavior. When a democratic government implements a new law, it's usually the case that enough public support exists for it to pass. However, there will always be people, sometimes a large number of them, who don't support the law. Yet, by definition, if the law applies to them, they have to obey it or risk being penalized. This forced behavioral change, however, may be followed by a change in attitude later, so that people who were initially opposed to the law eventually come to accept it. A classic example is the law of buckling your seat belt. Polls show that many of those who initially opposed wearing seatbelts later supported mandatory use. Franner and Hain, I can imagine the same switch with the prohibition of smoking in public places. Initially, the ban caused opposition and outrage in many countries. Today, many people can hardly believe or even remember that smoking used to be acceptable in universities or hospitals, or that teachers could smoke at school. Many of those same resistors found it obvious and good that the law was changed. Here is another example of attitude change being a consequence of behavior instead of the other way around. Imagine a bullfighter and a slaughterhouse worker. Figure 10. They are both kill bovines for a living, and yet our reaction to their jobs may be entirely different. Most of us will be angrier at the bullfighter's actions than at the slaughterers. Why? It might be that bullfighting is seen as entertainment and frivolous, whereas many believe that killing cows for food is a necessity, even though, in the final analysis, eating meat is not less trivial than entertainment. Bullfighting also happens in the open, whereas the public can witness the butchering of animals. A more fundamental reason why people might judge bullfighters more severely is that, outside of some countries, few of us participate in the sport, which makes it a lot easier for us to condemn it. Most of us, however, to eat meat, and it's a lot harder to condemn a behavior you are indulging or complicit in. In other words, where you stand depends on where you sit. As long as we eat meat, we are stakeholders. Our dependence on meat, on death, is so great that it almost prohibits us from thinking rationally about it. It makes us think as it were with our stomachs. Another example of how our behavior influences our beliefs and attitudes can be found in the study interestingly titled "The Role of Meat Consumption in the Denial of Moral Status and Right to Meat Animals." Lofnell et al. Participants had to indicate by means of a questionnaire their moral concerns for animals and judge the moral status and mental states of a cow. Here's the catch. The researchers served half the participants dried beef, whereas the remainder received nuts. The researchers observed that eating meat reduced the perceived obligation to care for animals and the perceived moral status of the cow. Moreover, those who would be served meat were less likely to ascribe to the animals the mental states necessary to experience suffering. The researchers concluded, the current study provides direct evidence that eating meat leads people to withdraw moral concern from both animals in general and the animals they ate. Meditating death eating appears to have an important impact on the perception of meat animals, which are viewed as unworthy or moral consideration and lacking the mental states necessary to experience suffering. Lofnen et al. It is easy to imagine that this dynamic not only occurs in individuals but at the level of society and culture. We don't eat animals because we consider them inferior, but we consider them inferior because we eat them and have been doing so for a long time. Seeing animals like this is one more strategy to reduce unpleasant, dissonant emotions. Here's an example of behavior influencing attitudes of an altogether different kind. In October 2016, the podcast Radiolab ran an episode called Alpha Girl, featuring Amy Pearl, herself a digital radio producer. Pearl related how, after she became violently sick when she ate meat, it became clear she would develop an allergy to a sugar called alpha-galactose, alpha-gal for short, which is present in the blood of mammals and consequently in red meat. It turned out that the trigger for this sudden allergy was a tick, which has been producing the same effect among hundreds of people. Amy explains how she would always been into meat. Meatballs were her favorite dish, and she loved to eat them at steakhouses. Becoming suddenly allergic to red meat was not fun for her, and for a while she fought it. She even landed in the hospital emergency room after stubbornly attempting a few bites of grilled steak during barbecue season. However, the episode ends with Amy saying how she feels about eating meat now. I don't think I would go back to eating meat necessarily. I wish I could be a vegetarian for ethical reasons. It's a factory farming and that kind of stuff. Of course, I'm forced to not eat it, but at the same time, if I had the willpower, I would probably go that way anyway. Also, I think it's great. We are all evolving to be on this planet, which is getting harder to be on, and we know that meat takes a lot of resources, and now I'm not doing that. So the tick is helping me evolve into a better human being. Mac Iran and guilty. The tick was the trigger for Amy's behavior change. Her forced behavior change made her more open to the benefits of not eating meat and clearly affected her attitude. One final example of behavior influencing our preceding beliefs is the most relevant for our purposes. A significant number of people who start out reducing or avoiding meat, death, and other animal products for health reasons will progress to include ethical reasons for their behavior. In this case, the change starts with a certain non-moral attitude, concern for health, which leads to behavioral change, eating differently, which appears to open the gate for changing attitudes about animals. According to one study, about 25% of vegetarians who became vegans for health reasons listed the ethical reasons as their current motivation. Hoffman et al., page 142. Another researcher writes about changing motivations. Very often, health-oriented vegetarians had come to accept the ethical arguments against eating meat or had simply come to dislike it. Hamilton, page 160. Anecdotally, you may know vegans in your life, or even be one of them yourself, who stopped eating animal products because they were concerned about their health. Either in general or for an acute situation like a heart condition, but then became convinced of the ethical arguments. See also Coney 2014, pages 74-75. What exactly happens when a change in behavior leads to a change in attitude? As we've already seen, the theory of cognitive dissonance may provide part of the answer. In this case, the dissonance-reducing strategy consists of people changing their attitudes so they match their behavior. By way of illustration, when people are legally obligated to wear the seat belt and don't like doing so, their only recourse to lift the dissonance is to start to agree with the idea. Another possible explanation is that when people behave in a certain manner, for whatever or even for no reason, they may realize this behavior is not as complicated or inconvenient as they would expect it would be. This makes it a lot easier for them to see the benefits of the new behavior, such as how wearing a seatbelt makes you safer. Let's transfer this to the domain of veganism. When people actually listen to vegans' moral arguments, and often we don't even achieve that level of engagement, they know that if they take those arguments and themselves seriously, they will need to change their behavior. But changing their behavior is not something they look forward to doing because of the inconveniences they they will face, and because they worry they won't be able to enjoy good food anymore. You may have heard people that say they don't want to watch Earthlings because they know they will have to go vegan afterward. Once they experience that the behavior, eating vegan meals isn't so hard and can even be enjoyable, defenses may drop, openness to moral arguments may increase, and compassion can grow. All of a sudden, the idea of animal rights becomes a lot easier to accept. The truth is no longer that threatening. Motivated reasoning or why facts don't change our minds. From what we have seen so far in this book, you may rightly conclude that the value of rational arguments and facts is relative. Not only do they have the combat age-old ideas and desires, but our minds, vegan or not, are prone to all kinds of illusions, errors, biases, and other conditional responses that prevent us from thinking straight. In many or most cases, people don't seem to seek out rational argument, in order to find out the truth about something, but rather the other way around. They use them to defend the ideas or intuitions they already possess. It seems that our ability to reason developed as a means of justifying ourselves and connect to other people rather than as a truth-finding instrument. Hate. Reason developed not to enable us to solve abstract, logical problems or even to help us draw conclusions from unfamiliar data. Rather, it developed to resolve the problems posed by living in collaborative groups. Colbert. What's going on in our heads a lot of the time is what psychologists call motivated reasoning. Our mind is looking for justifications or rationalizations for our intuitions or behavior. Rather than being open to the full range of evidence, most often we want the conclusion of our thinking to be that we don't need to do or change anything. So we recruit reasons and thoughts that justify our favored conclusions. When we are in a motivated state, we are driving in a certain direction. We are personally involved and we will steer our reasoning so it can justify our preferences that are shaped by our habits and appetites. Motivated reasoning is neither rational nor objective, and it often has problematic consequences. When people are in a motivated state, they may avoid or discount inconvenient information, also known as facts, which otherwise would be relevant. In one study, Piazza and Lofnan, researchers confronted participants with an imaginary, newly discovered animal species on another planet, Troblans. When the Troblans were described as intelligent, people were more morally concerned about the animals than where they were presented as not so smart. However, things got really interesting when, in another study, pigs and tapirs were also presented as intelligent animals. In the case of pigs, which, unlike the tapir and the Troblans, people eat, porcine intelligence had much less effect on people's moral conscience for them. In other words, the fact of the pig's intelligence was strategically ignored. As you will have guessed, its behavior influences attitudes again. Self-perception theory, which we already came across, may also help explain what happens when behavior influences attitude. The theory maintains that people may develop their attitudes about something by observing their own behavior. If it were, for instance, to become profoundly inconvenient and expensive to eat animals, people would eat fewer of them and start to think of themselves as the sort of person who eats little or not meat. Death. They would even be likely to come up with stories about how they would wanted to eat fewer animals all along. In other words, we may stand up for what we believe, but we may also come to believe in what we stand up for. Meyers, page 116. Takeaway 1, allowing all reasons. This chapter has contained bad and good news. The bad news is something advocates for many causes have probably been aware of for some time, but have refused to face head-on. Awareness is overrated. Awareness is overrated. The good news is that change can also start with behavior, and that people can start caring about animals as a result of a change in behavior for other reasons. Let's combine these insights with what we know from the previous chapter and look at the concrete implications for vegan and animal rights advocacy. The first takeaway is this. We can use whatever non-moral argument can help people change their behavior. Health, environmental, and other arguments can be perfect motivations for people to start moving along the vegan spectrum or to go vegan. We should expect openness to moral arguments to be much greater once people have commenced a certain change in behavior. These non-moral arguments grow more important when we take into account what we concluded from the preceding chapter, that creating a substantial group of reducers may be the greatest means to change the system. The conclusion from both chapters is that it's vital to use motivations that can get many people to reduce their meat consumption. Health concerns are the main reasons reducers cut back on meat. Death. Cooney, 2014, page 76. Others include the environment and a desire for variation and to try new things. Worries over animal welfare are not top on mind for reducers. Phonalytics, 2007. In the end, we will need people to care about animals. Our use and abuse of animals is one of the gravest moral outrages of our time. We want to raise awareness and make people see non-human creatures as individuals that should not be exploited. Too many vegans, any message that downplays that idea is problematic because it doesn't appear to lead to that ethical concern. The same vegans would insist that if we don't communicate the moral gravity of the situation, people will never understand the underlying dynamics of power and exploitation that make that abuse possible. As long as people haven't appreciated this situation, such vegans will argue they will always reproduce new kinds of injustice. My point is that although I agree that animal advocacy needs people who have changed not just in their behavior but also in their hearts and minds, this conscientization doesn't necessarily need to be the starting point, just as the initial motivation for people to start the trek to Veganville isn't that significant. In certain circumstances, depending on the situation, the medium, or the target audience, we can or should move the message about animal ethics to the background or sometimes even ignore it altogether. We can let people experience vegan food for whatever reason, or even for no reason at all. It vegans' quest for a new kind of person, a Homo empathicus, so to speak. It's okay if people's new ethics follow their behavioral change rather than precede or cause it. It's a mechanism we should be open to explore and use more in our movement. Not only do the animals not care about what kind of vegans we are, but more importantly, everyone starting out, for whatever reason, may become the right kind of vegan. Employing the health, taste, environmental, and other arguments is not only acceptable but also commendable. Using a variety of reasons will provide us with more chance of appealing to everyone, including those for whom consent for animals is not strong enough to change their attitudes or behavior. It's always matter to tag our message onto values that people already possess, rather than tell them which values they should have, which mostly means insisting on having our values. One additional reason for not overemphasizing moral arguments is that apart from this not always being effective, it can also backfire. People have persuasion resistance. They don't like other people to preach to them. One study on attitudes toward vegetarians shows that vegetarians were rated less positively after respondents imagined their moral judgment of meat eaters. Death eaters. Busy. According to the authors, their studies empirically document the backlash reported by moral minorities and trace it back to resentment by the mainstream against feeling morally judged, Manson and Monin. Moreover, when we ask people to change their beliefs and accept our ideology, they will see the change as much greater than their behavior or concerns about their health. Researcher Hank Rothgeber indicates that ethical vegans cause more dissonance-reducing strategies than vegans who argue for protecting one's health. I talk about some of the psychological aspects of communication and persuasion in Chapter 5. For now, it's instructive to remember that moral advocacy has downsides, and this gives us one more reason to appreciate other motivations. Counter arguments. Altogether, I don't suggest at all that we drop moral arguments. I'm aware that people may have concerns or doubts about downplaying them or focusing on other arguments. Let's look at some objections. 1. Does the health argument lead to more chickens and fish suffering? Some vegans, among whom are those I respect greatly and am usually in agreement with, feel we should only use arguments about animals, killing, suffering, justice, or any combination thereof. The other arguments they believe could backfire and, in the short or long term, not have the desired effect. Their most common concern is that as the raising of chickens or catching of fish is not viewed as being as ecologically destructive or unhealthy as rearing cows to consume red meat, using environmental and health arguments may cause people simply to shift from eating red meat to eating chickens and fish. Unlike cows, chickens don't produce greenhouse gases through enteric fermentation. They provide a relatively efficient feed-to-food conversion ratio. The switch in diet, the argument grows, would mean more animal suffering, as you need hundreds of those smaller animals to provide the flesh equivalent of one cow. I agree that this is a genuine concern that we should watch out for this substitution effect. But allow me to suggest a few things to consider. First, studies and polls aren't at all clear that reducers of red meat will eat more chicken. A 2014 study by the Human League suggests that red meat reducers and avoiders actually eat significantly less chicken and only marginally more fish than people on a student diet. Human League Labs, page 5. The Food Analytics study that examined lapsed vegetarians found that among this group, those who avoided beef and or pork did not consume more fish or chicken. Usher et al. 2006a. Looking at several studies, Nick Cooney also concludes, it appears that people who cut red meat out of their diet do not end up eating more animals. 2014, page 110. On the other hand, Matt Ball in The Accidental Activist, page 188 and 9, cites several sources that suggest there is a shift from red meat to chicken. So we need to conclude that the jury is still out at the moment on this issue. Secondly, we might want to view people's decisions to switch from eating red meat to chicken or fish over the longer term. Far from being a hard and fast commitment to eating animals, omnivores' immediate increase of chicken or fish consumption may be one step along a continuum as they start to include more plants in their diets. Progress is not always linear. One can imagine as a case in point that children of health-conscious parents who may consume fewer cows and pigs but more chickens and fish than the average omnivore may be more likely to go vegan than the children of average omnivores. Thirdly, for now, health and environmental organizations are talking about shifting from red meat to chicken and fish anyway. It is important for our movement to take charge of the health and environmental arguments as much as we can, and frame them also to benefit birds and fish. Nothing should keep us from using health and animal arguments together. When in some contexts and for some audiences we emphasize the health and environmental arguments, we can always also talk about our concerns for the suffering and killing of chickens and fish. We can effectively communicate our issues, saying it's not just a matter of our health but also of their lives. What we should definitively not do is to valorize the animal argument as a correct, altruistic argument and denigrate the health argument as selfish. There's nothing wrong with wanting to maintain wellness. Indeed, it might allow us to have more energy to help others. Also, the arguments can intersect. Many animals in factory farms become sick because of the confined and crowded conditions they are bred in, and those diseases, E. coli, Campylobacter, Salmonella, avian flu, and others, may pose a direct threat to humans. Another altogether different concern with the health argument is that some vegans exaggerate the health benefits, suggesting a vegan diet is a miracle cure against all illness, including heart disease, obesity, or diabetes, or even the easiest regimen to meet all nutritional needs. Vegan diets too have proven health advantages, and dietitians such as Brenda Davis, Virginia Messina, Vicento Medina, and Jack Norris provide informative and solid science to back those advantages up. However, it's better not to exaggerate claims about veganism, a tendency I call vegalomania. If only to reduce dropout from those who fail to undergo the wrong growth transformation they think vegans promise them. 2. Are non-moral arguments less sticky? As I mentioned earlier, an extensive 2014 study conducted by Fanatics shows that in the US, 84% of vegetarians and vegans stops being vegetarian or vegan at some point. When we only look at vegans, the dropout number is still 70%, Asher et al. 2014. I will talk about how to prevent or reduce dropout in more detail in the final chapter of this book. Here I will briefly discuss how the rate might be related to non-moral motivations. Among respondents to the study, a majority of current vegetarians and vegans, 68%, checked animal protection as a reason to be vegetarian or vegan. This compared to only slightly more than a quarter, 27%, of lapsed vegetarians and vegans. In contrast, health motivations were cited by a similar portion of current, 69%, and lapsed 59%, vegetarian and vegans. Although this study can only speak to correlations with lapsing as opposed to causation, and there are limitations with self-reported data of the nature, the difference in animal protection motivations is noteworthy and could potentially be subjective that ethical motivations provide more staying power than health motivations. A conclusion that some people take away from this survey is that protecting one's health is not a good argument to communicate in our Be Vegan outreach, and that we should always advocate with moral arguments. I definitely disagree with this conclusion. If we had to pick only one argument, it's clear the ethical one has the most steering power. It is actually the only motivation for being 100% vegetarian or vegan. However, even among those study participants who checked animals as a motivation, no less than 70% returned to omnivorism, admittedly from a tiny sample. This number is significantly less than the 95% of vegetarians or vegans who say they were only motivated by health reasons, but it shows that animal reasons are not sufficient either. Nick Cooney, based on his overview of other studies, concludes that whereas it's possible ethical vegetarians and vegans stick to their diet longer, the difference doesn't seem too large. 2014, page 91. More significantly, these numbers don't prove that the health argument is damaging or useless. The authors of the report write, while the health motivations are associated with a greater degree of lapsing, it is also of note that more people reported these health motivations, suggesting that even if this messaging leads to more lapses, health-related messages may still be helpful in encouraging more individuals to start the diet. Asher et al. 2016a. What if health motivations and health communication were more suitable for attracting many people initially who might them develop over time into ethical vegans. As stated, indications are that a significant number of health vegetarians may grow to being ethical vegetarians over time. It's also quite possible that in answering the question about motivations in retrospect, lapsed vegetarians and vegans downplayed their former motivations, or that current vegetarians and vegans identified more motivations than they initially possessed. As Connie suggests, regardless of how much people cared about animals when they were vegetarian, people who have gone back to eating meat will be likely to say they care less about animals. 2014, page 89. This again is explained by the theory of cognitive dissonance. From the present research, we cannot conclude that health is significantly less sticky a motivation, and more studies are necessary to suggest dispensing with the health argument, and so, as some people do, seems unwise based on what we know today. The phonetics researchers conclude the majority of those who adhere to a vegetarian-vegan diet or have done in the past have multiple reasons for doing so. Harsher et al. 2016a. As a side note, the fact that so many people dropped out is not depressing as it may sound to vegans. First, it means the potential for the number of vegans to increase it is a lot greater than the present 1 or 2%. Secondly, many famous vegetarians are interested in picking the diet up again. According to one study, only a minority of ex-vegetarians or vegans said they were now regular meat eaters. Haverstock and Fogays. The average former vegetarian or vegan may be thought of a meat reducer or even a semi-vegetarian. Usher et al. 2016a, and by now we know how crucial these are. Even if health vegetarians don't stick to their diet consistently, but stick mostly to it, and we could easily make more health vegetarians, this argument would favor promoting the health benefits. Usher et al. 2014. Thirdly, the same study, more than a third, 37% of former vegetarians vegans indicated that they were interested in resuming a vegetarian-vegan diet. Of these individuals, more than half, 59%, said they were likely or very likely to do so. Health seems the number one motivator for readopting the diet among those who expressed an interest. Finally, at the least, during the years they were vegetarian or vegan, these ex-vegetarians influenced the market, helped create more options by increasing demand, and spared quite a few animals from a life of suffering. Animal Charity Evaluators, ACE, believe 7 years to be the strongest estimate we have for the mean length of time vegetarians stay vegetarian. Takeaway to make it easier. Our third takeaway was that we should allow for and work with all possible motivations, including health, sustainability, and taste, so that people start eating differently. The second takeaway is that bypassing arguments and motivations, we should also focus on creating an environment that facilitates behavioral change, which in turn can facilitate an alteration in attitude. It's tempting to think we've come far enough in vegan awareness and product development that it's easy for almost anyone to be vegan by choice. That, however, would be wishful thinking. For many, the taste of many animal products alternatives, such as cheese, steaks, or salmon, is not on a par with the originals, nor is their availability. It's certainly becoming easier every day for vegans to find their favorite products, but it would be a stretch to say there are ample choice of bread products and dishes everywhere. Apart from supermarkets, depending on the country or city you live in, many restaurants and canteens lack a decent vegan option, let alone an acceptable choice. Price can be an issue too. Meat alternatives many fruits and vegetables, especially fresh ones, are more expensive than meat. Convenience is another factor. People still think they don't know how to use some of these products or are unsure about which to buy or include in their meals to meet nutritional needs. Summarizing, we can say that the vegan option is far from being the default. To see more clearly how alternatives and motivations relate, consider plane flights. Flying is one of the most significant greenhouse gas generators. Climate change obviously threatens many sentient creatures and even whole species. Imagine that for your job, your mission, or your family, you need to be on other continents on a regular basis. The alternatives, traveling over land and or sea, aren't possible or, because they take much more time, are impractical. In order for you to choose these alternatives, you need to be extremely motivated. Conversely, the better the alternatives are, imagine a super fast and less polluting boat, let's say, the less motivation you need. Let's bring this to our own domain. Imagine that the only vegan food you could eat for the rest of your time, probably curtailed, life was water and bread. Would you remain a vegan? Maybe your answer is a resounding yes. But would you have gone vegan if there had been a only possibility? You should yes. Again, but it's hard to know for sure because we assume your beliefs were influenced by the availability of lack of good alternatives. Likewise, many people today will become vegan as soon as it's easy enough for them. Maybe they will only start moving when alternatives are everywhere and are as real as the real thing. The real thing. Death is the real thing. Maybe they will need something that's entirely identical, like clean meat. A cell culture-based food about which I write in the next chapter. The point is, the simpler we make it to switch, the more people will do so. Hence, we need to move from this situation. Figure 11, lower availability requires more efforts. Alternatives, effort. To this situation, Figure 12, higher availability reduces the required efforts. In marketing terms, we could speak about how switching costs, the cost one incurs when changing products, suppliers, and brands. The costs can be financial, but they can also be consumers of time or mental space. Phone or insurance companies, for example, want to make switching to their product as easy as possible while at the time making it difficult to move from their product. In our metaphor, if the road to Veganville offers people everything they need, it will be much easier to start on that road. If people know that every few miles they can get water or find hearty food, a resting place, a place to fix their shoes, it will be much easier to induce them to make the trip. This is the subject of the next chapter. Conclusion. We've covered a lot of ground in this chapter. Let me recapitulate. The significance and weight of moral arguments as a driver for change are relative. We want people to be vegan because they care about animals, and we have to raise people's moral consciousness if we seek lasting change. But this concern for animals can come as a result of a change of behavior for other reasons. It's a more indirect route, but if it works, we should use it. In Rules for Radicals, Saul Alinsky writes, with very rare exceptions, the right things are done for the wrong reasons. It is futile to demand that men seek to the right thing for the right reason. This is a fight with a windmill. The organizer should know and accept that the right reason is only introduced as a moral rationalization after the right end and has been achieved, although it may have been achieved for the wrong reason. Therefore, he should search for and use the wrong reasons to achieve the right goals. Page 76. This is not a betrayal of the animals. Put succinctly, it's not because we don't talk about things such as ethics and justice that we are not working on them. David Ben-Sakin, founder of the vegan consultancy company Plant-Based Solutions, says, we are entirely committed to advancing plant-based products that align with our values, but we do not market them based on these values. Leenaert, 2017. See box on page 92. Making meat consumption harder. How easy it is to be vegetarian or vegan is also relative to how easy or difficult it is to be a non-vegan. Apart from making vegan food easier to find, we can try to make it harder to produce and consume non-vegan foods. Def. Certain regulations regarding the raising of animals, such as requiring them to have more space, can make production more costly and thus the final products more expensive. For that reason, animal welfare reforms, which by definition offend absolutist animal rights advocates, might quietly but relentlessly undermine the economic structure of scale that enables factory farming to survive. Industrial animal agriculture is doing what it can to make things more difficult for developers of plant-based alternatives. Egg producers in the US, for instance, attempted to make it illegal for Hampton Creek to call its plant-based dip mayonnaise. It didn't work, and Unilever is now marketing its own vegan mayo to compete. The dairy industry in Europe was more successful in ensuring plant-based milks couldn't be called milks, and plant-based dairy alternatives are taxed more heavily than animal-based dairy products. Lobbying to create a level playing field would be highly valuable here. I listed two important takeaways from the behavior attitude dynamic. One is that we should use all reasons in our advocacy, particularly those that motivate many people to reduce, as a large group of reducers can change the system of the fastest. The other is that we can forget about argument entirely and focus on people's environment instead. Creating a facilitating environment is what the next chapter is all about. Page 81 for environment, making things easier. The way we change the system isn't by convincing people to do the right thing. The way we change it is by creating an entirely different system. Hampton Creek is about the philosophy that believes the only way to good thing wins is when the good thing is so obscenely better than the not so good thing, you cannot help but do it. Just Tetrick, CEO, Hampton Creek. I have talked about the call to action and the arguments we can provide people to start the trip to Veganville. I've said that as attitude change can follow behavioral change, we should use any motivations that can lead to the latter. I have argued that we need to create an environment that facilitates behavioral change. I abbreviate this last principle to CAFE, which stands for Creating a Facilitating Environment, CAFE. In terms of Veganville, how accommodating is the word? Can travelers find everything they need on the journey? Food, water, resting places? How many fellow travelers are there? By environment, I mean everything external of the to the people who want, or whom vegans want, to change. When we create a facilitating environment, the right thing to do becomes the easy things to do, sometimes to the extent that hardly any effort or motivation is required. For example, we can try to persuade people that plastic light bulbs are bad for the environment, or simply make it much more difficult for consumers to buy them since they are, let's say, more expensive or the alternatives are otherwise superior. One obvious means of changing the environment is through legislation. In this case, plastic light bulbs are forbidden by law in Europe and are simply not an option anymore. Another classic example of changing the environment is provided by Brian Wansink, a professor of consumer behavior and nutritional science. In this experiment, moviegoers received popcorn in either a large or a small container. Those who received the large container ate 45% more popcorn and 33% more when the popcorn was purposely stale than those with the small containers. Portion size is an element of the environment. Small portions can make people eat less without them needing to try to control themselves. Wanting and Kim. I have actually already mentioned one method of creating a facilitating environment. In Chapter 2, we saw that meat reducers, by influencing supply and demand, sustainably alters the environment that facilitates change and make it easier for everyone to move along the vegan spectrum. This is an indirect bottom-up approach to tweaking the environment, but there are more direct methods. Obviously, a reciprocal relationship exists between supply and demand, and we can stimulate or support the supply production side more directly so that the demand follows. In addition, we can work with institutions to help us implement change in a top-down direction. This chapter focuses on the alternatives and the companies that create them. I also take a look at how the vegan movement can or should relate to the commercial world in general. After that, I examine some targets for institutional change, including policy, education, and organizations. Improving the alternatives. If people don't have good, valid alternatives for animal products, change becomes a lot harder. Think again of the lack of alternatives for polluting airplanes. I use the term improving and alternative broadly. Alternative should be understood to cover not just products, food and otherwise, but services that don't entail animal suffering or exploitation. Improving applies not just to quality, mainly taste and texture, as well as healthfulness, but availability, variety, price, and other factors. In providing alternatives, commercial companies complement the vegan movement and are crucial allies. Most of what vegan advocates do is raise awareness and give people reasons and theories for not eating animal products, as well as practical tips to help them go vegan. But if we want people to apply this knowledge or put that awareness into practice, they will need something to eat, and we need companies to produce that food. Now it goes without saying that veganism per se does not necessitate that we mimic omnivorism's commitment to processed foods, nor, for that matter, that the only food available is produced by commercial companies. A vegan diet can consist entirely of naturally occurring whole foods, which we can prepare with love for our friends and family each night. Indeed, some vegans argue that we need to move away from developing fancy cakes, cheese substitutes, or fake meats, or that we can make our own soy milk and tofu. I understand and honor this view, but I also live in the real world where convenience and time are valuable commodities for hurried commuters, busy parents, and professionals who eat only at restaurants or dinners. Remember, our task should be to make veganism easier. Given that change often starts with behavior rather than attitude, the alternatives and the companies that make them become even more crucial. Apart from selling their products and offering alternatives, simply getting products into stores with or without a vegan, vegetarian, meat-free label helps raise awareness about and mainstreams the idea that we can live without, or at least with fewer animal products. Companies also have their own outreach channels, newsletters, and social media through which they spread the vegan message, more or less explicitly. They can lobby to change laws on behalf of consumers, and they may at times sponsor or partner with organizations, projects, or initiatives in the vegan or animal advocacy movements. New Kids on the Block. Vegetarian and vegan companies in the many countries have spent decades on work developing and marketing meat and dairy alternatives. These enterprises can be large or small, local or multinational. Their products are sold in specialty food stores, but many also make it onto supermarket shelves. Recently, two new players have become involved: disruptive startup and traditional meat companies. We've seen vegan startups for decades, from local stores to restaurants, from web shops to producers of alternatives. These ventures are a crucial part of the fledgling veg economy, but they were not usually established with the ambition of systemic change built into them. That factor distinguishes the disruptive startups, most of which originate in the US, especially California. These companies are looking to develop alternatives that could potentially topple entire sectors of the animal foods industry. Such game-changing ambitions require substantial investment, and these companies are usually funded with venture capital (VC). The solutions these companies arrive at are often high-tech. Here are a few of them. Impossible Foods is developing the ideal plant-based burger, see box on page 86. Beyond Meat does the same as Impossible Foods. Their Beyond Chicken and Beyond Burger produced are already in Whole Foods market. New Ray Foods is trying to create synthetic shrimp from algae. Hampton Creek is working to take egg-laying hens out of the food chain by developing egg alternatives. Hampton has been successful at branding and marketing its Just Mayo vegan mayonnaise. Clover Foods has a similar mission as Hampton Creek, but is even more high-tech. It's working on the world's first animal-free egg white and is a division of Indibio, the world's first synthetic biology accelerator located in San Francisco. Perfect Day wants to produce a product that is chemically, nutritionally, and taste-wise identical to milk, based on cow DNA, but with an otherwise no cow involved. Memphis Meat in Silicon Valley has already created the first meatball from cured meat. In the Netherlands, the famous Vegetarian Butcher is a young company with the ambition of becoming the biggest butcher in the world. In just a couple of years' time, the company is selling its products in 4,000 outlets in 15 countries. The Vegetarian Butcher works together with the world-famous agricultural university in Wageningen and the Technical University in Delft to engineer and accelerate technological breakthroughs. These startups hold some advantages compared to companies founded more than a decade ago, and their emergence has been facilitated by several new developments. Critical among these are new food technologies, a higher rate of awareness about the problems of animal agriculture, in which the vegan movement played an important part, and VC investment amounting to hundreds of dollars, millions of dollars over the last few years. These funds allow the entrepreneurs to recruit the best researchers, tech people, and marketers to develop and promote their products. The investments also carry symbolic and signaling value. When famous VC firms such as Kleiner Perkins and Kochla Ventures, as well as change makers such as Bill Gates, Google Sergey Brin, or Lin Ka-shing, the second richest person in Asia, open their wallets, others take notice. The investors are signaling that animal products may have no or a very limited future. Readers who feel conflicted about capitalism may consider the possibility that these ventures are probably among the best things capitalism has to offer right now. Without the promise of earning money for their investors or shareholders, many of these companies wouldn't have been able to raise the necessary capital to establish their ambitious projects. The second group of new players consists of national meat companies, dev companies. More and more businesses that produce animal products are taking an interest in alternatives. One famous example is Rügenwalden Mühle, one of Germany's most respected and oldest meat companies, which has invested substantially in meat alternatives. See box on page 19. Another is Tyson, the world's largest producer of chicken meat, which bought a 5% stake in Beyond Meat and recently set up a $150 million fund to invest in startups with the aim of investigating the possibilities of alternative protein. It's not hard to see how some in the vegan movement might not be comfortable with such developments. It may irritate us when companies that make billions from killing animals are now trying to get their slice of the vegan pie or carve out a segment of the vegan cake, so to speak. Let's look at how the vegan movement can relate to companies, whether they exploit animals or not. Impossible Food. Impossible Foods was founded by Patrick Brown, a professor emeritus at Stanford University, widely acknowledged for his work in biochemistry. In 2009, Brown took a long sabbatical to think about what he wanted to do with his life. He decided to focus on one of the world's greatest environmental problems, animal agriculture. Brown founded Impossible Foods to develop a vegan alternative for meat, for death. Using his knowledge of biochemistry, he raised millions of dollars for his startup and even received and declined an offer from Google to acquire it. At the moment of current press, the Impossible Foods burger is available at select locations in the US and has just launched its first large-scale production facility. It has gotten ample media coverage, creating some hype for the burger. Its gimmick is that the ham iron in it makes the burger appear to bleed when you fry it and put it on the plate. The vegan movement and business. The vegan movement's relationship to the corporate world is ambiguous, to say the least. Sometimes we lavish our love on a company for developing a new product or laud a restaurant for offering a new vegan dish. Sometimes we descend on their social media feeds like an angry mob when they offend us. Organizations too can work both positively and negatively, employing the carrot of communicating a company's good deeds, or the stick of telling the entire vegan community or the whole world how evil his company is. Both methods are valid and can work, and this ambiguous relationship with companies is expected and understandable. However, you can also find vegans who are profoundly skeptical or even cynical about the corporate world and harbor anti-capitalist, anti-finance, and anti-commercial sentiments. These attitudes are mostly ideologically inspired and come from concerns about justice and equality, or from wariness about what they see as greed and a hunger for power. Animal advocates have a choice whether to make trust or distrust our default attitude toward commerce. Although we should be on our guard, distrust as a default attitude can be unproductive and lead to many missed opportunities. That the first drive of any company is, by definition, continuity by profit is not in itself reason enough to distrust it. Fortunately, due in part to their visibility on social media, companies are paying more attention to accountability, sustainability, and ethical approach to employment and their means to conducting commerce. At the same time, we, as consumers, should keep insisting on integrity, transparency, and corporate social responsibility in business. The quest for profit is a powerful driver of change. At the moment, a lot of money is being poured into alternatives to animal products with the expectation that a lot of money will pour out, as well as a disruption of the entire social order. In such a circumstance, it's probably more strategic for vegan animal activists to make use of the profit motive rather than condemn and shun it. The reason why a commercial organization is presenting vegan products or services, starting to offer vegan dishes in restaurants, or selling them in a supermarket isn't all that important, even though it might make vegans feel better if a business is in it for the animals. Whatever the entrepreneur and company's motivations, they are helping to change the system by shifting supply and demand, and in case you find it important, you can take hope that companies themselves are not immune to behaviors changing attitudes. The fact that a company's first motive is profit means that it's not just the growth of the vegan products category in general that matter, but the growth of the company's own brand. Thus, companies may compete with other businesses that sell vegan products. From a non-profit perspective, this can appear strange. I remember being initially confused by it when I had my first dealings with commercial enterprises, but it's perfectly usual business practice. Being sponsored by companies. From my time at EVA, the organization I founded, and from listening to people tell me about their experiences in other groups, I know that whether a non-profit should or should not accept a certain business sponsorship can lead to complex and interminable internal debates. When the default sentiment towards the corporate world is distrust, many Christians and caveats will need to be aired with the whole team and members and supporters. Christians will be asked about the company's integrity and whether associating with that business will damage or benefit the organization's reputation. There will be debates about whether the organization should make compromises or how much money it should ask for. Sometimes these collaborations or even only discussions about them will lead to schemes within the organization. When you develop a good relationship with a company, however, that business sponsorship and support can be vital. When EVA was developing our First Day Veggie Day campaign, it was clear to us that the most obvious collaborator was a large producer of plant-based foods. We explained to the company how EVA's campaign emphasized the low environmental footprint and health aspects of plant-based foods, and how these arguments dovetailed with the values and objectives that the company wanted to have associated with its brand. We worked together for many years, and the business monetary sponsorship alone, in exchange for visibility in our campaign, was instrumental in making the campaign a success. Finally, I happen to believe that ambition and business acumen are attributes to be cherished, as is a healthy intention to the financial bottom line. Too many small vegan firms made up of wonderful but impractical idealists have failed. The animals need more than idealism and good intention. Ally or enemy? Many companies can be potential allies, and vegan activists should work in tandem with them. Others can better be seen as the opposition. When vegans want to disrupt, it should be with the right EA, the wrong companies, IE, the wrong companies at the appropriate moments. My question is whether we can recognize allies when we see them. Take the case of Tyson. One could wonder pragmatically whether Tyson is out to sabotage or slow down the vegan companies they invest in, or believe idealistically that it's wrong for a commercial enterprise that makes money by killing animals to profit from an alternative. It's hard to be sure of either the motives of such businesses or the consequences of what they do, but here are some arguments for why I believe we should see them as allies. First, behemoths like Tyson have a much greater potential to take a huge market share and reach many people than vegan companies or organizations can't. Think of Tyson's advertising budget alone for these products. Tyson possesses considerable financial and human capital, such as the R&D department and their brand and retail franchises. Their contracts with distributors, wholesalers, and retailers. It's important to realize that all these assets are dual use for animal and non-animal products. And it's a reasonable supposition that the company is agnostic as to what ingredients go into their products, as long as there are a market and that market is profitable. Secondly, the lobby for animal products is powerful. But as the industry's financial dependence on selling them decreases and its profits from vegan products increase, we can expect a shift from antagonism to support for vegan consumption. Plant-based meats may be an example of this. Some brands are now owned by enterprises that originally only sold dairy versions. Imagine how their opposition toward non-dairy milks and as an alternative may decrease once they have a stake in the non-dairy category themselves. It's one of the reasons why Good Food Institute CEO Bruce Friedrich called the acquisition of Silk, an American soy milk producer, by Teen Foods, a traditional dairy behemoth. One of the best things that could have happened in the movement, our hands house. Helping companies help the vegan movement. If businesses can be influential and beneficial to the vegan movement, how can we help them help our cause? As individual customers, we can obviously choose which vendors or producers we patronize. We can talk or write about companies or their products on blogs and social media and tell our friends about them. We can send these enterprises constructive feedback. Most particularly, we can avoid antagonizing them unnecessarily and recognize our allies when we see them. In most cases, I would argue a boycott of vegan products because they are produced by an unauthorized non-vegan company is counterproductive. Unfortunately, vegans occasionally criticize people and businesses on our side of the fence. An example of unnecessary antagonism occurred with Daiya Foods, a Canadian company that for many vegans was the first to bring out cheese that melted with all the gooeynesses of dairy-based cheese. When the company displayed non-vegan recipes on its website, some vegans started a petition to boycott Daiya. Whereas an advocate wouldn't hand out a leaflet in places where animal products were among the serving suggestions, expecting a company trying to reach mainstream consumers to do the same isn't realistic. As a minimum, vegans can simply choose to agree to disagree and let such an instance pass, instead of actively protesting against the firm. On this point, legendary animal activist Henry Spira, talking about alternatives from animal tests, has advised that I believe vegans should be heard in all such cases. If people are going to develop alternatives, it's the people in the research community who will be developing alternatives. If you are going to get the regulatory agencies to change their requirements, it's going to be animal researchers who are the ones who are going to do it. It's not going to be us who are going to do it. I mean, These are the thoughts that you need if you're going to be serious about change. You are not going to reprogram them by saying we are saints and you're sinners, and we are going to clobber you with a 2x4 in order to educate you. Singer 1998, page 113. A meat company with an identity crisis. Over the last few years, Rügenwalder Müller, the ancient and deeply respected producer of all things meaty in Germany, has shifted its focus to vegetarian and vegan products, spending over $40 million on the on the promotion of meat alternatives, which is more than all other companies in Germany have spent combined. With the support and guidance of the Germany-based pro-vegan food awareness organization Provec International, formerly FEBU, Rügenwalder has reduced the number of eggs in their non-vegan products and introduced several more vegan products. Rügenwalder also supports the naming of meat alternatives the same as meat, i.e., vegan schnitzel can simply be called schnitzel, a plan the Farmers Union and even the Federal Ministry of Food, Agriculture and Consumer Protection in Germany oppose. Rügenwalder is example number one of a meat company, fighting for vegan issues while many of the traditional vegan companies themselves remain uninvolved in this kind of lobbying. The CEO of Rügenwalder has said that the company may not make meat from animals at all in 20 years and has called the meat-based sausage the cigarette of the future. Ally or enemy? For me, the case is closed. The Daya boycott probably had a great deal to do with vegans' expectations. We don't anticipate much vegan product generation or market outreach from a giant meat company. Therefore, when a business we thought was vegan slips up and disappoints us, we are irritated. Such annoyance is a profoundly human reaction, but it makes little sense and it's generally unproductive. If we animal advocates want to be more concrete in our support of companies, we should look to our own organizations. Most obviously, this would be by helping to increase demand for those goods or services. When, thanks in part to our outreach and factors outside of our control, demand for vegan food increases, the pie gets bigger and the companies selling vegan products have more to stamp among them. Vegan or animal advocacy organizations can raise general awareness or highlight specific companies, brands, or products in their outreach. The latter can be part of the formal sponsorship, collaboration, or simply because the organization likes the company or products and thinks more people, both omnivores and vegans, should know about either. We can publish product or restaurant reviews, thus sending more people to the company. We can place paid advertising in our magazines or on our websites. Or we can even present awards to the best products to garner public attention. Plant-based solutions. Animal advocates can start a company to help other businesses, vegan or not. David Benzaken worked in fundraising and advocacy for various animal protection groups, such as Farm Sanctuary, before founding a company called Plant-Based Solutions in 2012. Its aim is to help market vegan consumer products into the world. David and his team manage a number of areas for their clients, including marketing, branding, fundraising, and more. Its clients have included gardening, Green Monday, Miyoko's Kitchen, and Trillian Cheese. David believes that although education and advocacy are vital tools to raise awareness, the animal advocacy movement should also focus more on using the market to advance vegan living. He feels that by taking on this previously unaddressed strategy, he is making a greater difference than when he was replicating the same activist strategies as his peers in the non-profit sector. Larger or more established vegan and animal advocacy organizations may possess in-house expertise that offers businesses consultations that may prove valuable to them. They may be able to help companies extend their range, correct flaws or mistakes in products or packaging, train chefs and buyers, and help in other ways. They can endorse products and present unique insights into the market of heavy users and provide channels to reach them. Provec International has a whole start department. It offers seminars, videos, and individual coaching for vegan entrepreneurs and has supported hundreds of vegans who wish to open their own businesses. They even provide loans. Provec also has its own testing community to help new and more established companies test market, then products and receive feedback. Another practice through which vegan organizations can help businesses is by informing and educating their own supporters, sympathizers, donors, members, subscribers. Organizations can help supporters open their minds to the possibility that not all meat companies are necessarily enemies. They can encourage them to get over their suspicions about money and investors and to appreciate the benefits of science and technology. Given the interest of many vegans in natural or organic foods, many of them may be even more distrustful of food they perceive as unnatural or processed or dependent on technology than the general population. Clean meat offers a case in point. Clean meat is fresh, developed from animal cells without slaughtering the animals involved. There are good reasons to be excited about the potential of clean meat. It could be the technological revolution that precedes a moral transformation. The prospects for product growth are good. Researchers are confident that in the next 5 or 10 years, they will be able to overcome most technological barriers. Furthermore, the price of the product should eventually drop enough to make it competitive with conventional model. Clean meat can be more sustainable, requiring less energy, water, or fertilizer. Healthier, it's easy to control the fat content, for example, and safer, a lower risk of all kinds of contamination and the danger to workers from the slaughtering process than conventional meat. Beyond the technological and regulatory challenges facing clean meat is public perception. The production of clean meat is obviously more high-tech and seems less natural than what we are used to natural. However, it's a confusing and not particularly useful concept here. Not only are the animals who are trucked to the slaughterhouse full of chemicals and hormones, but they are killed and dismembered using a wide array of electrical and mechanical tools. Where is the inherent naturalness of this process? Furthermore, we might add not everything natural is good for us, namely radioactivity, and not everything human-made is negative. Penicillin is a case in point. Genetically modified organisms, GMOs, are another example of a natural-unnatural confusion. Many people, including vegans, are opposed to their use. In certain circles, it's almost taboo to say that you are ambivalent or agnostic about even researching their potential. In theory, at least, GMO products could reduce animal testing and creating better alternatives, as well as grow plants with higher nutrient profiles, increase agriculture yield, and requiring fewer pesticides. Although it's necessary to be careful with new technologies, it's important to retain some objectivity and not judge them on the basis of hearsay, emotions, or ideology. The American startup Clara Foods is developing a substitute for egg whites. The substitute, however, is based on genetically modified yeasts, which means that many companies and consumers might be wary of adopting it. Currently, it wouldn't be allowed in the European Union. In the case of clean meat and GMOs, vegans should distinguish between principled objections, e.g. on the naturalness of genetic modifications, and practical or situational objections, e.g. a concern for monopolies or the privatization of public knowledge and resources. Consumers in the vegan movement can be innovators or early adopters of new food products and technologies. If we want this to succeed, we should lend our support while of course never letting down on our guard when vegans mean business. People who want to earn a living by making the world a better place, often end up in a non-profit organization if they are lucky. That path seems the most obvious one for change makers. However, entering or starting a business can offer several advantages over non-profits. A company has an easier time making money. It can be more sustainable than an organization that has to scrape together its funds from donors and/or subsidies every year. Businesses can also be more scalable and thus potentially have a wider reach or more influence. Some advantages or non-profits are that they can work with volunteers and can receive subsidies and donations and can often count on more goodwill and enthusiasm than a company can. One aspect then can go both ways is credibility. At first sight, non-profits may look trustworthier because they don't appear to be motivated by money. Islands and infiltrators. Vegan restaurants and shops are examples of what I call islands, a mere sea of omnivorous establishments. Infiltrators, on the other hand, are vegan products in supermarkets or vegan dishes on the menu of regular restaurants. When we vegans are influencing influencers and changing institutions, we are usually attempting to insert infiltrators. Islands make vegans feel good. We don't need to walk past shelves or counters of animal products. And we don't need to worry about meat or dairy in our dishes or on our plates. We may feel ethically more comfortable by spending our money on islands. Nonetheless, infiltrators are crucial if we want to reach new customers and get more exposure among omnivores, many of whom will never enter a vegan restaurant or a specialty shop and will never buy a vegan cookbook. One problem in today's market is that vegan stuff is seen as stuff for vegans, and omnivores will pass over the vegan option because they are not vegan. Apple is just for apple. Vegan. Just as the non-diabetic among us might avoid a dish labeled suitable for diabetics. But they also have an agenda. Animal rights organizations are not the most reliable sources of health information. It may be thought. Moreover, to business folks, non-profits may not always be the most dependable partners. The borders between for-profit and non-profit structures are less clear-cut than they used to be. Many non-profits look to earn income, whereas companies can have corporate social responsibility or volunteer programs. In between are social enterprises, wherein the social objective is the reason that raison d'être of the business, raison d'être. Rather than maintaining the old profit versus non-profit dichotomy, it may be more useful for activists to consider a spectrum of engagement, ranging from finance first to impact first, with many hybrid possibilities in between. Some of the disruptive startups I mentioned above are strange beasts. The entrepreneurs in question seem to have founded them with the goal of helping to solve of the environmental, ethical, or health problems inherent in animal products, and so appear more like social enterprises. That perception is what allows a company like Memphis Meats, which wants to make slaughtered animal meat history by replacing it with clean meat, to set up a crowdfunding campaign to raise money from its supporters. That said, most of these businesses has received venture capital, and we can safely assume that investors will want a profit from the investment. Hence, in spite of the noble aim of changing the world, such companies have to make a profit, which, as we saw, isn't necessarily at the expense of promoting veganism or changing social realities. Of course, apart from funding a multi-million dollar enterprise that tries to disrupt the whole meat industry, beef industry, you can also start your own small or medium-sized concern, such as a restaurant, store, or local company. You can even monetize more direct forms of advocacy, making a living from your blog, website, podcast, or YouTube channel. Other targets for creating a facilitating environment. So far in this chapter, we've concentrated on companies producing and offering vegan products. But we can influence many other institutions to create a facilitating environment. These are any commercial business, governmental institution, major NGO, educational establishment, hospital, or insurance company, to name a few. All can be influencers or multipliers. They can broadcast our message to many more people than we can reach by ourselves. There may be large structures with thousands of employees, many of whom eat every day in the canteen. They can also be influential beyond their own structure. Next time.